So a very good morning to all of you. We move on now in the plenary session to the session on indigenous knowledge in the Arctic research. Very much connected to what the panelists discussing the International Polar Year were talking about. My name is Katrín Jakobsdóttir. I'm a senior emissary of the Arctic Circle Assembly and also the chair of the Polar Dialogue, where we try to facilitate dialogue between scientists, experts, the public, indigenous peoples, and policymakers and politicians. Last September last year, I was in Greenland and joined a meeting at the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources, where we were talking about what norms, what values should apply when we do research in the area around the Arctic, where we have the different indigenous peoples living. And how do we do that research in collaboration with the indigenous peoples? And actually this meeting is inspired us to continue to do this session, but it has not been without problems, because as you see in your program, we have 4 panelists in the program. Malene Hegelund, senior scientist in the Greenland Climate Research Center, who is here. We have Sara Olsvig, international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, who is here. But we also have 2 indigenous hunters, Killak Danielsen from Qanak and Najannguaq Christensen from Savisivik. But I think this is actually such a clear example on when we want to have that dialogue, we cannot simply take our Western platforms and Western frameworks and say, please join us in our frameworks. Because what happened was that these 2 indigenous hunters were stuck in the weather. And I was actually talking to Malene, and she was telling me how they were actually stuck for they traveled for 21 days to attend Greenland Research Week in Nuuk. So maybe we should also think, when we talk about inclusion of the indigenous peoples, whether our frameworks and our platforms, and then I'm referring to the Western frameworks and platforms, are always suitable when we want to have a dialogue on knowledge and research. However, we found a sort of solution. So we sent them the questions. Killak recorded his answers, and his answers, he actually did them in collaboration with Najannguaq. And we have here with us Najannguaq Hegelund. She's going to read their answers during the session. So we will continue in a very hybrid way, but I think it's important that we remember that the platform and the framework matters, and we should be mindful of that. But great having you here with us, and I'm just going to begin by telling the audience here what question we sent to Killak and Najannguaq, and that was on the ice that's melting in Greenland and how their experience is, because we all know that climate change is having a huge effect on the ecosystem in Greenland and the whole Arctic. We see polar bears on the move. They are trying to find shelter in this very ever-changing world. We see the marine environment changing. And I wanted to ask them really how climate change and the melting ice appear to them in their daily lives. And now we hopefully see a video, and we will hear the answer from Najannguaq.
Kapersaattartumi nayuaqarpunga kalaallinunaani illuqarfiit avannersarpaaq taanni. Takorluoriaruk seqineq qaammallu qanoq assigiingitsiginerat. Kapersaruttorneraani ullup qaamarnganiit qaammatip qaamanga.
I live in Greenland's northernmost city. Imagine how different the sunlight and the moonlight are. The moonlight shines bright when the polar night is here, and it's our main light source when we are outside. However, we do not stop working, even though nature can be tough. We observe that the sea ice is declining. For example, we can no longer reach the offshore sea ice hunting grounds in that we are used to from 30, 20 15 years ago, we also observed polar bears becoming close to our cities, so close that they can pose a danger to us when we're outside. The walruses arrive later because the sea ice freezes later compared to earlier times. We used to go polar bear and walrus hunting on the sea ice, even as late as the early spring. Now that's history. On the other hand, it is positive that the sea ice breaks up early, because now we can go hunting narwhal earlier compared to before, which has always been the most important hunting profession to us. The Najannguaq Fjord is a large narwhal area. We do not fish in the summertime. Instead, we go narwhal hunting. Halibut fishing in Najannguaq area takes place between December and the end of May. These years, the hunting season has become shorter during that period, and from the month of June to the month of November. We live exclusively on hunting. It is not wrong to say that we lose income due to the earlier sea ice breakup, because it has started breaking when the halibut season is at its peak.
Thank you so much, Kilak and Najannguaq and Olenguaq. Malene, it was really you that inspired us to do this session when we visited September last year. And I can say that this has been quite a learning process for me, because what you see is that the indigenous people in Greenland and around the Arctic, they have a different view. They have a view which really centers about seeing man and nature as a whole. And therefore, their knowledge and experience is extremely important to us, for all of us, when we are always talking about finding holistic solution to the challenges that we're facing. I think we have quite a good example of that when we think about this way of thinking. So how can we better incorporate the indigenous knowledge and experience in scientific research and fieldwork? Because you have quite a lot of experience of collaborating, for example, with Kilak and Olenguaq and members of their communities.
I worked with Olenguaq for 15 years or so, and Kilak for the last 5 years. And it's a very good question. I'm still learning. It's not straightforward. And we're kind of figuring it out together along the way, because it's several things you're asking about, including knowledge when you're preparing a natural science project. Mm-hmm. That's what we are doing. So we are communicating a lot when we are building our projects, and we build our hypotheses based on indigenous knowledge. Mm-hmm. And we use we are deploying all our instruments from dog sledge through the sea ice, so we are completely dependent on their expertise. So that's one way where we really learn a lot, and due to their knowledge, our research is successful and our deployments are successful, and we know where to put them to answer our questions that we're building together with the community. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to indigenous knowledge and including that in Western science, it's a little bit different actually from using indigenous knowledge to guide your Western science projects. Mm-hmm. And it's not always straightforward how to our publications it's not built for bringing in knowledge from indigenous communities. So it's something that we're really working on, and we should continue discussing how we do that so we get the same value of the two knowledge systems.
But it's really symbolic that they couldn't make it to be here, because this is a very Western way of conveying science, talking about science and knowledge, where we all meet in big conferences like this. So do we need to kind of think again about how we have this interaction? Malene?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I feel we invited Najannguaq to the Greenland Science Week a few years ago. He was there in a plenum session like this, and he traveled for 21 days away from his dogs and his families just because of weather and logistic problems. That's a lot. I don't know how many of you would come here if you had to travel for 20 days to be here for an hour, but that's a lot to ask. And we say all the time we want to know what they think, we want to include the knowledge, but we really need to discuss with them how can we do this the best way instead of just asking them to do it like we do it.
Exactly.
That's my opinion.
Exactly. Now, Sara, if I go to you, because you have such vast experience in these issues as everything you have done and now serving as the chair of the ICC, so how, it's not only about what we're doing in research, but also in other areas. And we have a growing interest, not only from researchers from outside of the Arctic, but also businesses and other actors. And as chair of the ICC, how can we foster a global process to include indigenous communities around the Arctic when we have this scene that is drawing up in front of us of this kind of global community and not just the Arctic states and the permanent participants?
Well, there's a long range of things that we need to do, and we need to ally closely and partner strategically with all the non-indigenous people that are engaging in the Arctic and in our homelands. And I think that there's a big task ahead of all scientists, all researchers within Western thinking institutions and academia to educate themselves and read what we write as indigenous peoples and put out there in terms of protocols, in terms of how to equitably and ethically use indigenous knowledge, how to respect when our knowledge, we don't want to share it, and also look at how researchers can do exactly as Malene is doing. I'm very sure Malene is often listening more than she's speaking when she's with Najannguaq and Qillaq, which is also one of the recommendations we have from the Inuit Circumpolar Council. To address exactly that, ICC developed the Equitable and Ethical Engagement Protocols, which we are very happy to see are now also guiding university ethical guidelines, and also included and addressed in, for example, other processes such as the IPY we just heard from, where we are in the planning committee, but also the International Conference of Arctic Research Planning. So we see around us that the Arctic community as a whole does actually want to partner with us, does want to be our allies, but it takes the effort of educating oneself, because we are only few, and we can often be stuck due to weather. And of course, Avanersuaq and people in Qaanaaq and Savissivik are even further away from the new airports in Nuuk, so they don't necessarily enjoy the same increased connectivity that we have, us who live in Nuuk. From the Inuit Circumpolar Council, we have also, of course, initiated the Pigiarasorsuaq initiative in the area where Najannguaq and Qillaq are from. The Polinia in the water in between Iceland, Greenland, and Canada is a huge producer of biodiversity, and it has for many, many years been identified as an ecosystem and a phenomena in nature that needs special attention, that has special significance for Inuit in that area. So we have also engaged in producing Inuit knowledge, gathering Inuit knowledge, producing reports. We will have a report soon, based on the recommendations that ICC's commission, Pigiarasorsuaq Commission, issued in a few years ago, 2017. And we are engaging with the governments of Iceland and Canada to establish a historic thing, and that is an Inuit-led management regime of that area. And this is also an ambition for us to ensure that this is based on the knowledge of Inuit and other peoples, Inuit of that area, both on the Greenland, on the Canada side. So I think there's good examples to draw from, to also bring to the global attention for us to inform each other on how to make things better than we have seen for centuries and centuries.
But because you have been involved for quite some time in these issues, would you say that we are, because these examples you mentioned, they inspire hope, would you say that we are making progress? Is it too slow, or are we seeing any backlashes in that progress?
I think yes and no. We are seeing progress, I think, in the communication and engagement we have with our partners and allies in academia and in some governmental institutions such as the Arctic Council, which has a long tradition of working with indigenous knowledge. But we are also seeing a decline globally in the support and in the respect, promotion and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples. We are seeing a decline in addressing climate change, understanding the necessity of addressing climate change. We've just heard directly from Inuit in Najannguaq what the consequences of climate change is. We are right now watching in the news Western Alaska and 1,000 inhabitants being relocated due to flooding.
Yeah.
So the states in the Arctic must continue to address global warming. We are the ones affected the most, but we are seeing a decline in upholding the promises of the Paris Agreement, in addressing and championing a global focus on climate change, not only in terms of how the Arctic climate affects, the changes in the Arctic affect the rest of the world, but also how we as Inuit have been first to say climate change is happening, we are directly affected. It is directly infringing on our rights as indigenous peoples, our individual and collective rights.
And the backlash in the climate debate hits the indigenous peoples around the Arctic directly. So that is a hugely important point. Now I sent Kilak and Najannguaq another question, which was really about their experience of collaborating with researchers and scientists. Because what struck me also when I came to Greenland to have that meeting, the plane I was flying into Nuuk, it was full of researchers. And they were all going on some different expeditions. And obviously this is at least something that has an effect on your daily life, I would imagine. So I wanted to hear their views. So I will ask Najannguaq to tell us what they said.
It is not new that I've collaborated on research on changes on the sea and ocean currents. I also have more knowledge in the area. It would be better if the studies were published internationally and not only to the native citizens of the area. The collaboration around Malene's work is developing, and we have a good collaboration. And our knowledge is put to good use. For example, the recordings and our observations shows that our habitats are rich in animals. The North Water Polonia, no longer has a stable sea ice due to global warming. Only the coastal area freezes into ice. It is therefore noticeable that there is more focus on the area from the international side, both scientifically and on documentary films. I think they can publish their research a little more often. I think the world should be better at using our knowledge, because you cannot do anything about the new Arctic climate. Communication between us and other interested parties must be better if living conditions are to be made easier. Perhaps a representative from Qaanaaq could be established in the ICC so that we become more visible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, you mentioned, Malene, that it can be quite difficult to include indigenous knowledge in Western science. And we heard from a former panelist that there are different knowledge systems in the world, he said. What is your experience working both within, of course, this world of traditional Western science, and then being out there working with the indigenous peoples? How can we somehow create more understanding? I really learned that during my first year as the chair the Polar Dialogue and working for this assembly, that there are often difficulties exactly when we talk about this. And at the same time, we are seeing science being undermined around the world. So you could say that there are several difficulties in this picture that we're drawing up when it comes to the state of science, how it can somehow open more up to the indigenous knowledge and experience, and at the same time stand strong against those who want to undermine science and deny scientific facts. So what would you know, drawing from your experience, what kind of channel or a procedure would you see as the best one?
I don't think we can or should expect that all natural scientists are going to do community-based research. First of all, they're not educated to do that. They need training, but it's also going to have a really heavy impact on the communities, and they're probably not interested in that. Mm-hmm. I really miss some structures because I have seen a change within the past 10 years. Researchers are interested in understanding the needs of the communities and understanding, know more about indigenous knowledge, but they don't know where to get it. They don't know who to contact. They're also interested, they know that the communities want to know that they're coming, what they're planning, that they want communication, but they have nowhere to actually do that. So what they do is they turn up with all their gear, everything planned, and they meet someone in the harbor and they talk a bit with this guy or this woman, but that's not community engagement. Mm. You need a structure, some kind of what we're working on in Najannguaq together with Krislak is and other hunters is like an indigenous-led hub where communication can go both ways, training can go both ways, and you're actually talking to the community and not just one person you meet. Mm-hmm. That's something I think will be really fruitful all over Greenland, but especially the more heavily impacted communities for science, that we have these kind of structures.
Yeah, I can just see this before me, you know, just picking on the one random person you meet and talk about community involvement. So that's obviously something that can be quite complicated. We also asked our hunters about really this interest and the communication with both researchers and businesses. And I think that was the last bit that you maybe read out earlier. But there was a mention that the ICC could be somehow a more part of that. Can you tell us more about that, Sara?
It's absolutely correct. I hope so much someone from the municipality of Najannguaq is here, because for a number of years, ICC Kalaallit, the branch in Kalaallit, Greenland, has had seats for Inuit and Inuit. Inuit are the East Greenlanders, Inuit are the people of Najannguaq that we are meeting here by video. But funny enough, the municipality within which they live have not assigned a person from Najannguaq to take that seat. Mm-hmm. For Inuit, it's different. The municipality has made sure that it's actually one from East Greenland who's been in that seat. So that's something I know ICC Kalaallit is working on ensuring in the next round. We will have new delegates in the coming spring before we have our General Assembly in July, and ICC Canada takes over our leadership. So this is also something that we've been working with in this term from 22 to 26. What I also wanted to touch upon is that exactly what Malene is saying and you're asking about and they are addressing. It's not enough to think indigenous knowledge and involvement of indigenous peoples as being how to get from A to B. No. It is also about what prioritization to have when designing the research question, designing the research project. What is important to know more about? Mm-hmm. Where are the knowledge gaps? whereas there actually already existing indigenous knowledge that Western scientific academia still hasn't discovered, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think those things are deeply, deeply important for us to mention, because it's also the power structures within how academia and research works. There's both the question of whose knowledge is valid to whom, and then there's also the question of when that knowledge is produced, who's actually in power to decide what paths to take and what research projects to take. And this is some of the things we are addressing in the EEE protocols from the Inuit Circumpolar Council. But more needs to be done. We really call on the international research communities, especially those who engage in the Arctic, to think about it, to work on it, to take action on it, and actually also think back in time, centuries back in time, and be reminded of what research and academia and exploring the so-called ice deserts, which have names, Inuit names, what that knowledge production has meant and what role it's had in colonization. So we have much to learn in terms of turning things around, and it will only be for the benefit of everyone. It will only create the results and the knowledge produced richer. So it is something that we have to work collaboratively on, and we really hope that everyone in the science community will take that responsibility on their own shoulders as well.
It's an important point, Sara, you made there. But I'm going to have one last question for you, and then we are going to open up the floor for questions. I know there will be some questions from you. But this important point is also being aware of history and being aware of history of colonization, which I think it can be quite easy to forget if you're not part of it. So I think this is a hugely important point, that we kind of embrace that in our knowledge system when we are actually planning to do research that is based on community involvement in the Arctic with the indigenous peoples. So I think that's, and I am sure, Malene, you might want to comment on that, but my final question before I open up the floor is really, I was thinking about this last year in the plane, and I thought I would be really annoyed, if I was in my home doing my work and there were always some people coming to question me about stuff. I would become really annoyed. Also, if there were some people who were always coming to me in my home and saying, we could make some money out of doing this differently. I'm just speaking from, this is my character. So, but what I'm thinking about is that I thought, this must cause a lot of disruption to their lives. But I've also heard the indigenous peoples I've been talking to, yes, but it also creates opportunities. So if you would and could comment a little bit on how to find that balance, because obviously there are many opportunities between, with this interaction, but it can also be disruptive. Malene.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. But my first thought is actually that and I have that feeling quite often when I get these questions, that it's not for me to decide. We need to ask, what do they want? Is it annoying? How do you want to engage? How many, do you want capacity building? Maybe, is it something that people want, or is it, and what kind of capacity building? Very often I hear that they want training of youth, which is something that we in science could do so easily if we organized it the right way. So I really think for all these questions that has to do with how do we involve, how do we engage, we cannot discuss that here without having them in the room as well, because they have to decide what they want.
Yeah. Sara.
Yes, and I know I of course don't speak on behalf of the government of Greenland, but I'm happy to see that the government of Greenland is now working on a new legislation within research. And I very much hope that all of these things will be part of it. because we do see research fatigue. We also experience it in Nuuk. We have many, many researchers, especially this year, asking for interviews, asking for our perspectives, and asking us to be part of research projects. Paradoxically, some good efforts have been made to many of the research funding mechanisms to demand Indigenous people's participation in research, but the way that they are set up is that we are all receiving 5, 10 last-minute invitations after the research project was already designed, because they need to check that there's an Indigenous researcher on the project. So it really needs thorough thinking and restructuring, as Malene is saying, and there's a good opportunity these years for international research cooperation in the Arctic, and there's a good opportunity these years within Kalaallit because the new Research Act is under development. And I want to just reiterate again that research cannot run from also impacting the individual and collective rights of Indigenous peoples. So the act produced by the Parliament, of course, should be set up in a way that it protects the rights of Indigenous peoples, and especially in Kalaallit where colonization and knowledge production has for so long been used, sometimes against us. So it's a big task ahead of us, but I'm very hopeful that in collaboration we will find good solutions, and we invite people to take those perspectives in finding those solutions.
Thank you, Sara. Now it would be great to have some more light in the hall, and now you can raise your hands. Yes, I already have a question here in the front. Please.
Thank you. Thanks very much for a really fabulous and enlightening session. I wanted to ask your thoughts on, you talked about the impact of international trends on what goes on in the Arctic, and we have many Indigenous colleagues who find themselves within the borders of the Russian Federation. And I'm wondering if the panellists might reflect on how we can reach out to them, how we can support them in this really challenging time. Thank you.
A good question. Who wants to go first?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to reiterate again, I know others have also been doing so, that we have our preeminent body of collaboration in the Arctic, that's the Arctic Council. And the Arctic Council, unique in its structure, including 8 states and 6 permanent participants, which are the Indigenous peoples' organizations, including the Inuit Circumpolar Council, has unique ways of working, has set a path, paved the way for very, very good ways of engaging across state borders, producing the necessary knowledge, including Indigenous knowledge often, not enough, but still, in producing the necessary knowledge. I've been deeply concerned, for example, regarding permafrost data and the efforts to combat climate change since, of course, 2022. And I think we as an Arctic family and as an Arctic community continue to hold responsibility to be responsive, first and foremost, to climate change and to the effects of climate change to us who live in the Arctic. So our call from the Inuit Circumpolar Council is to continue the collaboration on these matters, the people-to-people ties and collaboration. We have our members also in Chukotka, Russia. We uphold our cooperation with them.
So is there an ongoing dialogue with the Indigenous peoples in Russia?
Yes, and when we do, for example, UN meetings, they are also able to attend in principle. We had a very important gathering in Sápmi, in the land of the Sami on the Norwegian side in 2023, which was the Arctic Regional Gathering under the UNFCCC Paris Agreement established platforms, where Indigenous knowledge has actually formally become part of knowledge production through the facilitative working group, where we share a seat with our fellow Indigenous peoples of the Arctic, the Sami. And we had this Arctic Regional Gathering, gathering knowledge holders from all over the Arctic, also from Russia. And we had members both there, there were some Russian Indigenous peoples there in person, and there were some who were online from Inuit in Chukotka. So there are venues that continue to work, and we must elevate those, especially those that are about knowledge production and those that are about people-to-people ties. So we have great expectations to the Kingdom of Denmark chairship of the Arctic Council to continue that knowledge production with a full circle of the Arctic.
Malene, would you comment on this, or?
Well, I mean, I have been in a EU project, Arctic Passion, where we had problems with keeping the full circle because of the political situation. So, in some situations, we are cut off, at least in the science community. But there's a big movement within science of keeping the observing systems running despite everything that's happening. So we keep gathering data. I've heard that in many other sessions as well. And also in Greenland, we are working on combining those observing systems, the DBOs, to local communities. So it's all linked into the society as well.
We have time for some more questions, so please, yes, I have a hand here. And another one there. We will begin here.
Yes, thank you. Anna Sauer from University of Ottawa and McGill. I have a translation question. When we do community participatory research, there comes an issue at some point of translation of Indigenous concepts and Indigenous knowledge. And you were mentioning the inadequacy of some of the platforms that we have as researchers, for instance, journals, that when we publish research with them and we publish research that uses and utilizes Indigenous concepts that are in their own languages, whether it's Kalaallisut or Inuktitut, whichever dialect of Inuktitut, it becomes a real issue of being understandable and communicating the research that is also aligned with whatever the community is expecting from that research to come out of. So my question for you is, how do you navigate this? And what are the paths forward? For instance, could we maybe one day imagine a journal that is in Inuktitut, that is in Kalaallisut, for instance, that would circumvent that issue of translation that we come across all the time? Thank you.
Very good question. Yeah, Malene.
The way I navigate is that I make sure that I mean, it's one further complicated in Qaanaaq because it's another dialect from the Western Greenlandic. So I have a very good collaboration with a woman who used to live and grew up in Qaanaaq and also understand the science world. But there are not a lot of people who can do that translation, and it's not a direct translation, which I really like that she's explaining things instead of just translating directly, because then it becomes completely income.
Yeah, okay.
So it is a challenge. If we can have journals.
we have one.
Yeah.
It could be used.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question here. We have time for maybe one more. So, yeah, okay. So first, yeah.
My name is Dina Brood-Roger from KU Leuven in Belgium. I've been living and working in Svalbard since 2017. But I have a question, even for those of us who would like to, from our Western science perspective, to work with community in a different way. Often the funding only goes for a certain number of years. So pointing exactly to what you were saying in the beginning, how can we work differently? Mm-hmm. Can funding be established differently? Because a community, when I work with people in the community, they don't want something for the next 5 years. And some of these ideas are very good, which come up and are funded, but short time period. Even if it's 10 years, it's short. Mm-hmm. So what can we do to change the way we work and the way we fund the work that we are doing?
Long-term funding.
Yeah.
Are you experiencing short-term funding as a problem?
Yeah, I think.
A challenge?
I think we all do. For me, it's a patchwork of funding, although it's trying to get things working. in the long term. So I have the same problem.
But how can we change it? Then we need to talk to the politicians.
And the Arctic Science Funders Forum.
Yeah.
And also the IPY and ICAR processes, the state institutions that fund Arctic research. Everyone involved need to have exactly that in mind. But I also wanted to comment on the language issue. One example is the report we are now finalizing on the gathering of indigenous knowledge in the Bigelasorsuaq area on the Galashnat Greenland side. Just yesterday I was seeing emails from our colleague who is our ocean and Inuit knowledge colleague who did the actual traveling and also spoke to some of the panelists here that have contributed who was writing that now it's been sent to the graphic designer. And then the graphic designer came back. I can see that there's some things that are a bit different in English and Galashisut. That's very typical, because we've had long discussions on how exactly to work with the Galashisut version, have it translated into English, and then again check, are we actually saying the same things? And even though we speak Galashisut and English at our office, we can be in doubt. So that's where it's so important to go back to those who were part of this knowledge production and ask them, is this actually reflective of what you were saying? And is this the way that it should be?
And this is actually a bigger problem coming from a very small language area, which is the Icelandic language, only spoken by 300,000 to 400,000 people in a very big world where many sectors are so kind of under the English dominance that it's difficult to keep up in finding the new words and the new translations. So I think this is also an issue for all small languages. But I have here a last question in the front row.
Thank you very much. A fascinating discussion. And my name's Stephen Heel from the Universities of the Arctic. And maybe as a wrap-up question, if you look back at the permanent participation in the Arctic Council, it's more than 30 years, or nearly 30 years now. If you reflect on that and then look forward, what has done most to help the title of this topic, which is Indigenous knowledge in Arctic research over that time? What's helped most, and maybe it can be taken forward?
Okay, so I will ask for very short answers. Sara?
It all boils down to the prerequisite to the enjoyment of all other rights, which is the right of self-determination, which also applies to indigenous peoples, of course, because indigenous peoples are recognized as equal to all other peoples according to international law. So are we actually upholding that? We've been pushing continuously in the Arctic Council, where the questions that were just raised are all different sides of the challenge. The funding part. When a project is proposed, it needs to come with funding. So as indigenous peoples organizations, we need to partner with someone who aligns with our interests. They might then have influence on what the research then has to look like, or the Arctic Council project has to look like. So for those same reasons, we've issued a position paper from the Inuit Circumpolar Council pointing to, at this very moment, where the Arctic Council is, of course, not working business as usual, doing business as usual, but also has a moment and a momentum to change things, pointing to those exact issues. And to me, the most successful projects are the ones that truly became and were developed by being indigenous-led. It's not easy, because the Arctic Council, as unique it is in a structure, is still based on an understanding of a state-based system. So it's a continuous push that we need to continue and work with the Arctic states and other indigenous peoples to open up for the understanding of how, and the processes of how projects are initiated and led. We saw how the responses to wildland fires gained so much from the Gwich'in Council International's leadership in that, addressing the issue with their interest and their priorities and concerns at the core. And that's what needs to happen much more in the Arctic Council as well.
Thank you, Sara. We need to stop. I know we could continue, but thank you so much, Najannguaq, for being the voice of Kilak and Olenguaq. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Malene, for really inspiring this panel. And thank you all for your great questions. Thank you.